Welcome to Rise, Hope and Healing After Sexual Betrayal, where we feature weekly conversations with leading betrayal trauma experts. I'm MaryAnn Michaelis, your hostess. Before we get started, we want to make sure that you are aware of our corresponding online courses, which you can find at humanintimacy.com. We have a Rise course, which follows Season 1, focused on helping individuals in those very first betrayal stages, giving you information and tools for your recovery journey. We also have a course which focuses specifically on boundaries, an area that so many of our clients struggle with, to help you step by step create and maintain healthy boundaries for yourself. You can also find courses on communication, relationship, and many other topics, so please check them out at humanintimacy.com. Finally, you can find us at youtube.com/@human-intimacy. And please, if this podcast has been helpful for you, we invite you to like it and share it so that it can help our algorithms, so that we can help other people who may need support as well. Welcome back to Rise. I'm here today with Kris Cristiano. Kris, it's been a while since we've had you, and it's so lovely to have you back. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here. It's always refreshing and fun to sit and talk with you.
Likewise. So today we're just going to dive right in. And in this series, we're talking about foundations, rebuilding the foundation. And where do you want to go with that today, Kris?
One of the biggest things that I see when people come in after betrayal, they're like, who am I? Their identity has been so tied to their partner. It's been distorted. And so finding out, who am I? Who do I want to become? Those are huge questions that are really at the foundation of healing from betrayal trauma.
I think we're talking about two concepts in here, which is individuation. Who am I as an individual? And also differentiation. How am I different? In my understanding, they're very similar concepts. Is that how you see that as well?
Oh, yeah. It's kind of interesting when people try to divvy things up into different buckets or categories. I'm like, good luck, because there's so much overlap. I mean, you can put a Venn diagram around everything, and everything layers on top of each other and builds on top of each other and gives a different context. And so, yeah, that's exactly how I see it.
Years ago, I had a friend who was probably in her 70s or 80s. Her name was Ellen, and she'd been married to somebody for 56 years and had been pretty abusive. And after they divorced, she came to every function. If somebody invited her over for dinner, it didn't matter where she was going, she brought watermelon. And we're like, what's up with the watermelon? Like, this is your signature thing, apparently. And she said, for 56 years, I didn't have watermelon. And I love watermelon. And so she brought watermelon because that was something that she brought back into her life. Her husband hated it, wouldn't let it in the house. But this was part of the individuation of saying, wait, hold on a second. I love watermelon. And I'm bringing that back into my life because that's who I am. And so many times we get swallowed up in our role and just our survival. And we lose a little bit. And especially with betrayal, it really causes us to step back and say, who in the world am I without this identity of my partner?
There is so much beauty in that story because that's exactly what happens is you abandon yourself. You abandon what your interests are, what your thoughts are, what your opinions are, everything in order to try and keep this system going. And something as simple as watermelon that is claiming that piece back. I mean, it's so small, but there's so much symbolism and so many layers to that. I love that. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. So let's jump into how do we do this? So we're talking about we've been betrayed. I'm trying to figure out who I am. Okay. Kris and MaryAnn, you're saying individuation or differentiation, but how do I do that? Where do we start with that?
There's different areas to try and figure out. First one, it's called self-concept, but it's a mental image of understanding what our beliefs are, what individually we hold as our values within ourselves, our traits, the things that are our abilities, our social roles. All of that has been twisted and distorted when you're dealing with betrayal and abuse. And let's be real, betrayal is abuse. And so answering that core question of who am I and that self-discovery day by day matters. The cheesy, silly little video I'll give clients. Have you ever seen Runaway Bride?
Years ago. Yes.
Okay. It's an old 90s rom-com, but there's a part of it where Richard Greer, he's yelling at her and going, "You don't even know what eggs you like. With this person, you like these eggs. With this person, you like these eggs." And she's saying, "Well, that's just called changing your mind." And he puts her on the carpet with that. But then that flips over to a different scene where she's sitting in the diner and she's got all these different types of eggs in front of her. And she's trying to figure out, what do I actually like? So I'll even start people off, and it's stupid and it's silly, but I'm like, I want you to go to 3 different fast food restaurants, get different French fries, and just taste them and physiologically feel which one do you find more pleasing. And sometimes people actually take me up on it. Sometimes they find some other way to do it, but it's connecting with your body on, what do I enjoy? Or going through a values exercise, and I'll give people a list of 200 values, and I'm like, circle everything you value. And of course, they're circling everything. Okay, cut that down to your top 20. And they kind of want to yell at me about that. They hate that. And then I'm like, okay, pick your top 5. And by that point, they want to punch me. And then I'm like, okay, now pick your top 2. And then they really hate me after that. But it's really interesting as they do this, and as they do this multiple times throughout treatment, and they start seeing what are their values, what is authentically true to them, and how have these values been shifted and tainted, and just the stories behind it through betrayal, and then as they're coming out of it. So having that self-concept of really knowing, what are my values, what are my interests, what are my traits, that's a huge piece to starting this identity journey.
I love that. A couple of other things that come to mind for me that I often use when I'm working with clients in this area is, I'll ask my client to think about when they felt most like themselves, when they felt free, when they felt open to being creative and spontaneous. And a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, that was when I was a lot younger, maybe 16, maybe 12, usually before a lot of shame showed up." And so I try to help them connect back to, what was that person like? What were that person's characteristics? And reconnecting to who I was before I had shame, before I had betrayal. Another adaptation is also doing some writing exercises. So, who was I before betrayal? And looking at, okay, who am I now? Are they the same? So, I was a kind person before betrayal. I'm still a kind person, and I've also been hurt. And in the recent past, I haven't shown up in my kindest, best self, but I am a kind person. Before betrayal, I was really funny. I was lighthearted. Oh, wait, that's still who I am right now. That hasn't changed. I was trusting. Oh, can I still be a trusting person? So, really looking at, who and how am I? And some of that writing is really clearing through and recognizing, here's how the trauma has impacted me. But can I find that core of who I really am, or can I come back to that? And I want to be really clear here. Betrayal changes us. And I had a client years ago who loved to read. She would go to book conventions. Everything was about reading. And after betrayal, she could not read anything. The minute she would open a book, everything would just kind of start dancing around, and she'd end up in tears. It took her 3 or 4 years before she was able to say, "MaryAnn, I read last night." And so this takes time, and I think it's really important to give yourself patience. When you sit down to do the things that you used to do, it's likely that you might not want to do them anymore. That there may be reminders or something that's associated with your spouse or partner that triggers and brings up some pain. And so we're talking about sifting through and figuring out, how do I find and hold on to my core of who I am? And also be patient with myself, saying, maybe it's going to be a while before I can read, because I'm not quite ready yet, because I've got some healing to do. But that doesn't change that I still love words and I still love reading. And maybe I need to listen to audiobooks for a while if that's something that I still want to have in my life. I can figure out different ways to bring that in as well. I've had so many thoughts as you were talking, so many good things that you just said. There's a book that I read years ago called The Color Code, and it goes right to that
concept of answering lists of questions of what your earliest self would have answered and getting really clear on your innate interests and thoughts and beliefs. I mean, just all of this stuff connecting back to that earlier part. And you figure out if you're more of a white or a red or a blue. And there's no scientific data around that book, but it's just starting that cognitive process of how do I reconnect back to who I originally was before all of this.
What color were you?
I was pretty equal red and blue.
Okay.
So it was wanting power and connection. And it's more of a type A personality, but still wanting relationships and wanting connection. And then also wanting to be in control doesn't always work. So there's my weaknesses that I'm throwing out there. Have you ever read that book?
I did not read the book, but I'm familiar with the concepts and I was told, and I identified with being a yellow, which is super extroverted and wanting just to play and have fun, and red still wanting to be organized and like, motivated.
Which is funny for our listeners. MaryAnn and I, we went to a conference and she was the one that was leading the pack on going bowling and doing all of the things. And I was like, I need a friend like this in my life all the time because I am not fun. So, you are definitely a yellow, and everyone needs a yellow in their life because you just bring joy.
Oh, thanks. That's kind of you, Chris. And we had a good time.
We had so much fun. It was so much fun.
Um,
And there's also the piece of if you find yourself in that place where you're not able to do the things like reading that you're used to doing and the things that bring you joy. As so many clients ask, am I ADHD? Am I this? And I'm like, I have no idea. I need you to talk to someone who's specifically trained to do testing in this. But if these are symptoms that are just popping up around betrayal trauma, chances are that's what it is. And it can eventually heal. And that's the difference is ADHD doesn't heal. It's not you're not broken. It's just a
I
different way of the brain working.
and PTSD has the intrusive thoughts. And
Correct.
so that makes a lot of sense that it looks like that and feels like that. Even though before I was able to be super focused and super concentrated. Now my brain's trying to make sense of that reality and questioning and wondering. There's a lot of anxiety. So that makes a lot of sense.
And also, it makes sense because with the body, if you're working, muscles will rip apart and eventually start to expand. And so the blood flow can increase, and there's this expanding motion that can potentially happen. Your brain doesn't have that function. And when there's betrayal trauma, there's literally a physical damage that happens in the brain. Dr. Armand, he's done lots of brain scans where he'll call it the trauma diamond. And you can actually see the physical effects of trauma. And so being patient and knowing physically what's happening also helps. It helps give yourself some patience as you're going through this process. And that as long as you keep moving forward, you're going to eventually heal. What that looks like is going to be very different for every single person, but just be patient with yourself.
I had a client earlier this week who started out saying, this is something I would love to do. And I said, why don't you do that? What's holding you back? What's going on? Why aren't you doing that? And we talked about the fears and the things that were holding my client back from pursuing what it was that they had identified that they were interested in. And what we found was because they had been in so much trauma for so long, they were in a survivor mode. And when we really explored that with the parts, they said, no, there's some generational stuff here, which made sense with their history. But as we looked at that, if I'm stuck in this survivor state, how do I reset? And in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk talks about doing things like meditation, doing things like yoga. He talks about women who've been in refugee camps in certain countries, where in those refugee camps, they will get together to sing, to clap, to dance. And so many times, these are things that we might associate with our younger self. Connecting back to these younger things that we've probably done and finding exercises such as yoga, such as meditation, to help calm our nervous system. These are tools that are going to help us reconnect once again with who we are. If our nervous system is dysregulated, that's where that kind of that ADHD, that scattery, frantic anxiety, fear, all of things that hold us back, we've really got to come back into let me slow down. Let me start to reconnect with myself through very intentional ways. If I'm not getting enough sleep, if I'm not exercising, if I'm not eating well, if I'm not slowing down and letting myself process through and acknowledging I feel really sad right now, I'm going to give myself permission to be sad and to cry. If I'm not doing those things, it's going to take significant time to heal. So often we feel like there's so much out of my control. I don't have the answers. I don't know what my spouse or my partner's done. I don't know my reality. I don't know the future. But we can come back to these things that help us reground back into, okay, yes, then who am I? Hold on a second. This is who I am.
I used to teach social emotional classes for second graders. You learn a lot about their families, and I'm sure their families did not want blurted out in front of a classroom, but they were hilarious. And I remember at one point, I put a line on the board and I was like, every adult in your life has this much energy. And I would circle half. And if your teacher has to spend this much energy telling you to sit down and be quiet, how much more energy do they have to be fun? And all of a sudden the kids are looking at me, they're like, oh, that's what my teacher's yelling at us by the end of the day. And I'm like, yeah. So it gave him a visual. I do this with my betrayed partners also. And I ask them, I want you to circle how much energy you're taking every single day just to breathe and just to get through the day. And they usually circle somewhere between 80 to 90%. And so I'm like, all right, you have 10 or 20% left of your energy just because of what's been done to you. I want you to pick 1, 2, or 3 rocks to get done every single day and to be intentional. And that can be doing a meditation. It could be going for a walk. It could be connecting with somebody, but it's doing those very small things. And I always start to remind people once they're starting to move and the acute craziness of the beginning start to fade, I'm like, fun is part of recovery. And so I love how you're talking about singing and dancing. I remember when the song Let It Go from Frozen came out. I mean, how many 30, 40, 50-year-old women were belting that out in their car, or have a playlist, have these things that feel healing to start to process that energy, but are also fun. Yoga can be fun. I mean, just don't forget that fun and that play is also part of recovery. It's not all tears and the hard work. Don't forget to add the fun.
And I think part of that is giving ourselves permission.
Yes.
Think, oh, just because things are so hard and yucky right now, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when there's a death of a loved one, we're incredibly sad. We're heartbroken. And sometimes it feels like I can't laugh. Nobody can say anything funny. I can't laugh, even though there are things that are funny, but it feels like this isn't a place where I could laugh. And I think recognizing that we are emotional beings and we don't just get locked into and have to sit in one emotion. We can give ourselves permission to feel lots of emotions and they're all okay. If my brother says something that is hilarious, I can be sad and also laugh at my brother's comedic timing. I can give myself permission to have all the emotions as well.
Clinically thinking about laughing, it titrates our emotions, which is just a fancy word of helping us move in and out of hard stuff so you don't burn out. Few years ago, there's a tragedy that happened in our community. A dear friend of mine was murdered by her husband. And pretty quickly, the kids started making jokes. And I remember my husband and I were like, do we cancel spring break or trip to Hawaii? And we're like, no. And we literally heard our friend Angie, her voice in my head going, don't be stupid. Because that's just who she was. She would look at my daughter and she'd be like, Allie, everyone between the ages of 12 and 18 are stupid. You're stupid and it's okay. And these funny Angieisms would just start to come up and it brought us together. It healed. It gave us perspective. And so humor is really, it's important.
Yeah, I think it's important in this conversation to talk a little bit about compartmentalization. When we're talking about betrayal and we're talking about trauma, we often dissociate. That's a normal byproduct of trauma, meaning rather than being in the full present right now, where I'm connecting Kris with you with our eye contact and our voices, and I'm tracking what we're talking about. If I were dissociated, I'd be here, but my brain would be over in another place. My body would be present, but mentally, emotionally, I'm just not present. I'm someplace else. And our brain does that with trauma as a protection because this is so intense. This is so much. I can't be in the present. And so I've got to exit and go someplace else. It's self preservation. But when we are dealing with trauma, it's important to notice, when am I dissociating? I remember early in my healing journey, everything felt like I was just kind of in a dream. And I could see myself going through the motions, but I was like, wow, I'm just kind of watching from a third party lens of walking through a dream. And my therapist said, this is dissociation. So recognizing that we have dissociation, it can be really helpful to say, right now, I am trying to be present with my kids. And I just had this big trigger come up, and I am still a mom who cares about my kids. That is still who I am. And so I am going to try and just put this trigger on a shelf. And I'm not avoiding it. I'm just setting it down, setting it to the side for just a minute so that I can engage where I need to. I can engage and support my kids, because that is important to me. Going back to those values we talked about, I have a high value on trying to be present for my kids. And this is such a challenge because of all the emotions that are there. But being able to say, tonight at 8 o'clock, I am going to pull out that box and I'm going to let myself go through all of those emotions. I'm going to acknowledge this is what's going on. And I recognize I can't store triggers. That's not what I'm saying, but I can recognize there's a trigger. And I can give myself permission to later on go back and sort through that. Being really cognizant about, here's what I'm choosing right now in this moment to do. Recognizing I've got big emotions, recognizing this is what's going on for me, and sometimes need to block out and just be right here. And I think that's one of the ways of reconnecting with ourselves. As you said, saying, what's most important? What's my number one most important thing to me? And maybe that's being present with my kids. So then how do I do that? And I've got to figure out what works.
One thing that I'll challenge my clients to do when triggers or when thoughts or questions pop up is have an ongoing list, or pull up notes on your phone, write it down, put it in a container, because a lot of times when you're trying to visualize putting it in that box, you're sitting here going, but what if I forget? What if I forget? Physically writing it down so you can tell yourself, okay, I'm not going to forget. I will come back to this later. Allows the brain to complete that cycle. So the percentage of the pain and the rumination goes down just by having that physical, tactile box to put it in. So just have a notes page, write it down.
Kris, what else did you want to make sure that we cover today as we're talking about this topic?
A lot of times clients, we want to get through the healing process as fast as possible. And they keep asking, what's the point of talking about this? There's been quite a bit of research on this. Dr. Dan McAdams has done some research about how we construct our identity around our autobiographical storytelling. And so finding those safe people to tell your story to, because every time you say it out loud, something else pops up. Somebody will ask a question. You'll have a therapist that will point something out like, hey, I kind of wonder if you saw it from this point of view, or if you saw it from this point of view. I was working with a client recently, and they were remembering back at the time when they didn't know anything and the way that their body felt. And they were just retelling the story. And it was just something else flipped. And they're like, oh, wait, I was actually feeling this. I didn't realize that's what it was. And so the more you say it, the more the loop closed. I'm sure you've talked about the Zygarnik effect on the podcast multiple times. It's that painful feeling of something isn't done. And we can feel that because how many times during the day are we like, oh yeah, I got to pay the dermatology bill. My kids are going to be out of school. I need to get eye appointments, all the things. And it's still on my mind and the loop isn't finished. But then once I make the appointment and I put it in my calendar, all of a sudden it's like that loop and that pressure goes away. The same thing when it comes to our stories about who we are. The more we talk about it, the more we understand about ourselves. We can understand our own story. We can see it from different points of view. And the more the story can basically get put to bed.
This is really important, finding those safe places where we can share our stories. And I think what you're saying is making sense of it. And for me personally, years ago, I had a dream. And in my dream, I saw myself really laughing and joking. And I was so sad when I woke up, because I woke up realizing, oh, that's a part of me that I am not reconnected with. And I recognized that I would go to events and somebody would say something and the whole audience would laugh. And I'd just be like, yeah, that was mildly amusing, but it wasn't like chuckle funny? Why is everybody chuckling? And I felt like there'd been some fundamental changes to how I reacted and responded to some humor. It was really important for me to recognize I love practical jokes, I love wordplay, and I realized that I haven't been able to reclaim that part of me yet. And being aware of that has been so important for me where I can conscientiously say, hold on a second, what do I need to do to unravel that? How can I tap back into that? How do I reconnect with the things that I think are so funny and so silly? Because for so long things were heavy and I felt like I just didn't have the time or energy, or I couldn't give myself permission to even go there. I recognize it as a part that I think showed up in my dream saying, hey, yo, MaryAnn, what's up? It's been a really long time. And so I think another element of this is being really conscientious, looking for opportunities, looking for what helps open me up to be silly, to be in places where I can start thinking about, oh, if we did this, this would be really funny. And this is very conscientious.
I want to be around you during April Fool's Day.
You know,
I think an overall theme that captures a lot of what we've been talking about is I love Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind. And as we discover who we were, that can be the end goal. As we discover who we want to become, who I am, we might be like, okay, this is who I am at my core. This is who I used to be. This is who I want to become. But when you start conceptualizing that, you're like, okay, that's my end goal. And then you can start making the steps of how do I get back there?
and I want to bring this all together, wrapping into one whole. So, listeners, if you're noticing this and your eyebrows going up, you might be like, wait a second. Last week, MaryAnn and Karen said that trauma fundamentally changes you. And this week, Kris and MaryAnn are saying, go back to who you are. I recognize that there's conflict or some tension there. In IFS, they talk about your core self. And there are 9 C's. Kris, I'm wondering if between the two of us, we can remember what they are.
It's 8 C's. And I always joke, I'm like, therapists, we like to be really cute and have all these acronyms and lists and stuff. But it's compassion, clarity,
Courage, being centered, calm.
there's 2 others.
Neither of us apparently had them memorized, and so we'll have these in the show notes. But coming back to who am I when I am centered with my higher power and when I'm working from this place where I have confidence, where I don't have my parts that are running the show because of fear or because of trauma, where I have trauma parts showing up, but really coming from a place where I can be creative, where I can have the courage to have boundaries and to really work from my center of here's what I need. And so, as we're talking about, we're fundamentally changed. And I think that change is that we have more compassion, that we had more wisdom, that we understand things more deeply. And obviously, there's some other changes there as well. But when we walk through hard things, yes, it does change us, hopefully for the better, and not leaving who we were behind, but reconnecting with that wholeness of who we really are. I really enjoyed this conversation today, Kris. What are your wrap up final thoughts before we leave today?
When I first started grad school, people were asking me, what's the one thing that causes this? What's the one thing that causes this? It's never one thing. It's a symphony. It's different brushstrokes on paintings where we try to conceptualize everything down into one tiny little box. We're going to fail. We're going to be disappointed. And yes, betrayal does change you at your core. And so does life. We're not supposed to be the same people 10 years from now, regardless of what happens to us. Betrayal does change you in one specific way, but so does being a mom. So does sending your child off to kindergarten. I just sent my oldest off to college and nobody warned me about parenting adult children. And I'm like, what the heck is this? This is the hardest thing ever. Life changes us. And so it's allowing yourself to be changed and learn, grow, but also still know that there's a center.
I love that. As you were talking, I was laughing, thinking having teeth fundamentally changes us. Learning to walk fundamentally changes us. We are fundamentally changed just by normal stages of development from birth forward. And so I love that concept of giving ourselves grace to change, to grow, and also to find and connect with our fundamental core of who we are. I think my wrap up for today is to one, as always, be kind to yourself. Be patient with yourself. Take a deep breath today. Kris, as you talked about earlier, go for a walk. Sit down and do some meditation, some gentle stretching, whatever it is. Be kind. Give yourself the gift of focusing on yourself for a moment. And I'm going to encourage you to find something that brings you joy. My favorite is baby's laughter. Babies have no guile, no agenda, who show up with their emotions as they are. Listening to a baby's laughter can be so healing. So if there are young people in your life that you can connect to, spend some time there.
I was just picturing laughter in my house right now is my 2 teenagers that are still at home towel snapping each other, and it's hilarious.
Oh my God. So towel snapping, teenagers, whatever it is where you find joy, where you find beauty, and where you find peace and rest. Take some time there. And as you said, this isn't a race. This is just part of life. And we are so grateful for the time to our listeners and viewers that you've spent with us today. Please, if this has been helpful, share it, like it to help our algorithms, and may you have a blessed day.
Thank you.